Good evening. Welcome to the Pullman City Council meeting for this Tuesday, June the 4th. And Dee, let's call roll.
Mayor Johnson.
Present.
Councilmember Chapman.
Present.
Councilmember McCall. Councilmember Parks.
Here.
Councilmember Records.
Here.
Councilmember Sorensen.
Here.
Councilmember Weller.
Present.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Eileen McCall notified us she could not be here tonight. Do I hear a motion to excuse?
So moved.
Second.
Those in second, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that comes the announcements tonight. If you'd like to be in the know about the Pullman School District, then don't miss Coffee with Bob, the Superintendent Bob Maxwell, tomorrow from noon to 1 o'clock at the School District office at 240 Southeast Dexter. Splash and Summer Fun just around the corner starts this Saturday, June 8th, from 1 to 6 at Rainey Park. Details can be found online. Pullman's Fresh to You Farmers Market is open for the season on Wednesdays from 3:30 to 6:30 at the new location, Brailsford WSU Visitor Center. Drove by that last Wednesday, and there were a lot of people out there. It's just great to see that. On Tuesday through July, discover new worlds through virtual reality at Neal Public Library. Youths ages 13 to 17, adults 18 plus are invited to experience VR during the library's Tech Tuesday from 3 to 6. A couple of proclamations tonight before you. One is on general aviation, and this is General Aviation Month. So Pullman, Washington has significant interest in the continued vitality of general aviation, aviation manufacturing, aviation educational institutions, aviation organizations, and community airports. Whereas general aviation and Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport have significant economic impact on Pullman and the Palouse region, its residents, universities, and businesses. And according to WashDOT, 2012 Aviation Economic Impact Study says that general aviations contribute more than $50.9 billion to the state's economy each year. And therefore, I proclaim General Aviation Week. The whole month of June is General Aviation Month. And also, we were asked to do a proclamation on behalf of scooters and motorcycles, and we did that as well. So each year, the third Monday in June is recognized as Scooter and Motorcycle Ride to Work Day. We've had Bike to School, now we have Ride to Work Day. This day offers cyclists the opportunity to demonstrate motorcycles as a viable, fun, and fuel-efficient mode of transportation and highlights the positive daily use of scooters and motorcycles. So Monday, June 17th is Ride to Work Day for scooters and motorcycles. Those are the announcements tonight. With that, we now move to a presentation by an intern that we have working with us, and Kevin Gardis, who can do the introductions.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my pleasure to introduce Megan Ford. Megan's one of our M&O interns. She works with Art Garrow out at M&O. Megan is a PhD student at the University of Idaho, and if that wasn't enough, she's also working on a certificate in statistics. I got a chance to see her presentation probably a month or so ago, and she's refined it since then. I was impressed, and I thought the council might find it interesting. It's kind of a new way of looking at infrastructure, and it kind of opened my eyes as far as the tools that might be out there.
Excellent.
So without further ado, Megan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Kevin. So, as Kevin said, my name is Megan Ford. I'm a management intern with the city. I work with Art. I was tasked with basically trying to figure out if there are any obvious predictors of water main breaks, looking at patterns in the region. So this is the Missouri Flat Water Main Break in 2010. As you can see, a lot of water was lost, and of course the city is interested in not losing that much water. This was caused here by this caterpillar, looks like. So I looked at spatial patterns, temporal patterns. I looked at whether we could predict water main breaks based on material, pipe length, pipe size, which is the diameter. Pipe length is the distance from node to node. Half section, which our town is basically separated into multiple half sections. Like, I looked at 8 different half sections. Pressure zone, which I'll talk to more about later, and the actual water pressure, or estimated calculated water pressure. So first of all, here's just an overall map of all of the water main breaks for the last 15 years, from 2004 to 2018. The colors are arranged from the warm color spectrum are some of the older ones, where the cool color spectrum of greens and blues are the more recent. and the symbols represent which month the water main breaks happened. And so you would generally see there's not any overall obvious pattern in terms of older breaks happening in one region and newer breaks happening in another. But this is kind of an interesting note up here, which is some more recently developed subdivisions, from my understanding, also has more recent water main breaks. Otherwise, I first wanted to look to see, are there any spatial patterns? Are there any hot spots? And based on half section, the half section of S6, which is located here in the bottom left corner, so the southwest corner, had the most water main breaks overall at 30. And then I wanted to see if there was any statistical significance, so I did a kernel density estimate and a chi-square test, and I found that there was significant hotspots, and there are 4 locations of hotspots. You can see them here in this contour map as well as the kernel density map, and then here I have circles around those 4 hotspots. And I think those are some of the more older parts of town. However, if you notice, I didn't have the age of the water main breaks to analyze as a predictor, so I wasn't able to look into that. Of interesting note is that there were 20 locations that had water main breaks that were repetitive, so recurring water main breaks. And here is a map of those 20 locations. And again, organized by color and by year and month. This one here was broken in the exact same month and the exact same year. That's why it just looks like a single symbol. Moving on. Oh, and then what's interesting to note here is this might be a place, if you see some of the more recent ones in blue, that might be a place where the city engineers might want to focus on replacing those water main breaks maybe before they, replacing the pipes before a break might happen in that area. So these would be important points to note, especially ones that were in those hot spots that I pointed out previously. I also wanted to see if there was any temporal patterns over time, and I found that there was an average of 8 breaks per year, 8.1 breaks per year, and there were 3 years that had a lot more breaks than other years, but they were not statistically significant. Nonetheless, I think it's interesting to note that 2008, 2011, and 2015 had a lot of breaks, while 2004 and 2005 had very few, though it was not significantly different. And then I was curious if there was an effective month, and as you can see, so there's on average of like 0.85 breaks per month. Summer and fall had more breaks than winter and spring, and it was a significant difference. There were significantly more breaks in the summer and the fall, and specifically August had the greatest amount of breaks. It had significantly more breaks than April or March, and April has the fewest number of breaks, with 3 over the last 15 years. And August has had 19 over the last 15 years.
Is it right at the start of classes in August?
Right. So I also was interested in the pipe material, and we have 4 different pipe materials, cast iron, galvanized, PVC, and DIP. Ductile iron. I'm just given the data. I don't actually even know what ductile iron looks like. But what I did find was that the majority of the pipe breaks are happening on cast iron pipes. I did come to learn that the majority of the older pipes are cast iron, so it would be expected that most of the pipe breaks would be on cast iron pipes, because they would be the oldest. What was interesting to note, though, when I did a correspondence analysis, was that the cast iron pipes were breaking mostly at the 8 to 10 inch range, while the galvanized pipes were mostly at the 4-inch range. This could also be because most of the 8 to 10 inch pipes are cast iron, while most of the 4-inch pipes are galvanized. Moving on from pipe material is the, sorry, that removed my boxes. The pipe size was the next thing I wanted to look at, and there were a whole lot more breaks for the 6-inch pipe size, there were 45 overall breaks, where the 12-inch pipe size was only 4 overall breaks. This might also be due to the fact that most of the pipes are 6-inch cast iron, the older ones. But of interesting note here is that the 2-inch pipes are mostly breaking in the summer when I did a correspondence analysis. May, June, July, and August is when we have a strong amount, or a large amount of 2-inch pipes breaking, but the 6-inch and 8-inch pipes seem to be breaking mostly in the winter time. One potential hypothesis could be that we're missing some of the smaller pipe breaks in the winter because we're not seeing them because there's precipitation happening that's kind of covering them up. That's one hypothesis, but we don't know that to be a fact, but it is an interesting note. And then also the pipe size based on year. And I've learned that we are basically replacing, as we are replacing pipes, we're replacing them with mostly PVC, mostly size 8-inch pipe PVC. So looking at the pipe breaks over time, you can see that the 2-inch pipes are breaking less. That's probably because there are fewer of them, and the 8-inch pipes are breaking more, probably because there are more of them being introduced into the system. But we don't know that for sure. That's why, but that's a hypothesis. And then pressure zones. So first I want to explain what are pressure zones. I should have put a map up there. The pressure zones, when it says low pressure zone, that's basically low elevation. And high pressure zone is high elevation. So that means that the water tower basically is in a high elevation. But the actual pressure would be predicted to be lower when you're higher in elevation and higher when you're lower in elevation, though that's not always 100% true. Nonetheless, I wanted to normalize the number of breaks per pressure zone based on this average daily demand, which was calculated for us in 2013. And that way I could compare the numbers across pressure zones. And I found that the pressure zone with the greatest number of breaks was the low pressure zone, therefore the low elevation. The lower elevation zone had the greatest number of breaks, and it was significantly more than all of the 3 high pressure zones, but not significantly different than the intermediate pressure zones. And just a note here is to look at this low pressure zone in August. It's the largest dot there. That's when the majority of all the breaks in town are happening in this low pressure zone and in August. Finally, I calculated the actual water pressure in pounds per square inch. This isn't exact because I used a statistical package to get the elevation for each location, so it's not 100% exact, but in terms of being relative to the other pressures, it is accurate. So I found that the majority of the breaks are happening in these middle to low high pressure zones. So basically from 50 psi to 100 psi is when we're getting the majority of our breaks. And that they are significantly more than the low and the very high water pressures. And that's also to be expected because the majority of the land is in these intermediate, the average pressure for these mains it does range from 50 to 100. So it would make sense that it would break within the most common range. So overall, and here's that same water main break when it first happened. I meant to have these pictures in reverse order where they had the caterpillar in there and then pulled out. But anyway, so these were all the variables that I looked at, and these were the ones that were statistically significant. So in conclusion, I would say that 95% confident that a water main break would happen to a 6-inch cast iron pipe within one of these hot zones, and especially within this low pressure zone. So probably within there or there. And given 6-inch cast iron, that's more likely to break in the winter and spring months. So I would also predict that. And come August, we're going to get a 2-inch break. That's all I got for you. Thanks.
So now, Art, how are you going to apply this? You're going to be out and start trenching come August, or what?
Exactly, yeah. We'll be ready. Backhoe will be with gas.
Yeah. So, questions of Megan on this?
So questions?
Very interesting. And Kevin, I know that you've had a chance to see this report beforehand, so it was interesting in terms of predictabilities in terms of that. I pretty well could tell you that the cast iron was probably going to break. It seems like,
But 6-inch and in the spring and
well, I hadn't got
winter?
to 6 inches yet. I knew it was going to be cast iron.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of illustrates one of the things that our maintenance, our M&O management interns do for us. There are a lot of projects like this that we are curious about, and we've wondered, okay, is there a pattern to our water main breaks? And we've dived into it a little bit, but having somebody like Megan that can really sink her teeth into it and look at all the angles is really helpful for us and helpful for M&O, and Kara's in the back, you know, as we prioritize water main replacement, figuring out where our highest probability breaks occur and targeting those. Coincidentally, our maintenance operations staff, which maintains the water system, went to some training recently, and there are software companies out there that are developing proprietary software that helps predict where water main breaks occur. I mean, it's a little bit of magic sauce at this point, but I think this is kind of the path that this is going in, and I thought you'd find it interesting. So,
Al?
Question, does the amount of water flow, have we looked at that? You know, I mean, low flow time, high flow time. I know you looked at pressure zones and that type of thing. I'm just wondering if there was anything in here about the amount of flow happening and the breaks. Did you look at that at all, or is that?
No, I didn't. Unfortunately, from my understanding, the data isn't collected on a minute-by-minute basis in terms of when the break actually happened. They can't say it happened at 12:01 p.m. when the flow was such and such. One way we've looked at was trying to connect it to the nearby meter, but we haven't moved in that direction because the access to the data is not quite
I'm
there.
just kind of wondering of, you know, summertime we got a lot more irrigation going on, but then the students aren't as much here. So, I mean, it's,
right.
Yeah.
where's the water? So, anyway.
Yeah?
Thank you, Megan. I think this is, I know there's a lot more work that goes behind this than what we see in the presentation, so I really appreciate all of your hard work on this.
Thanks.
I think it's excellent data to help us try to inform our decision-making processes better, and so anything we can do to have more data-driven decision-making is a bonus.
Oh, thanks.
And I assume the 2 inches, usually it comes from our water main to the residence, isn't it? Usually we running a 2-inch line to those in the galvanized?
Some of the older sections of town have 2-inch that feed homes. Like I
Okay.
said, fire hydrants are all on larger pipes,
Yeah, right.
but there's some remnants of the older system still.
Because I've seen some people in the neighborhood with pipes that are like over 30 years old, and apparently just the soil chemistry or whatever just really works on those galvanized pipes, and they seem to go a little bit.
I just replaced mine.
Yeah. My neighbor replaced his, so I'm getting nervous now, you know?
It'd be great to have data on the bedding material in which the pipe resides and
Yeah.
stuff like that, but it's just not currently being collected. I think another way to utilize this data would be also to say what don't we have and what might we want people to record in the future when they're going out and fixing these breaks, such as the piping material.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Megan. I was wondering if also you looked at the months, the heat, I mean, the soil moisture, was that also going into your data?
Unfortunately, no. I included a list of all of the data that I had access to. But I do think that that kind of information would be important to include in future analyses, and it should be collected probably by the people going out and fixing the brakes. We're looking at basically applying this to create a new checklist for the maintenance people, and then therefore we can gather more information such as the soil moisture level and such.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the, expansion or contraction versus the materials involved in there, and of course, the thickness. I mean, there's so much interesting chemistry that goes on there.
Exactly, and yeah, and you bring up a good point. That may be one of the reasons why the larger breaks, or why the larger mains are breaking in the winter while the smaller ones were in the summer.
Any other comments?
Just
Pat?
a quick one. And thank you, Megan. Great presentation. If you made statistics riveting.
I don't know about riveting, but it kept you from falling asleep.
And thank you very much.
You're
for your
welcome.
work. I think
Thank
this
you.
question is more for Kevin, though. When we actually go out and fix a break, what happens? Are the pipes replaced? What all is involved in repairing a break?
I'll take a stab at it, Art, you come up if I mess it up. But it depends on the break. So sometimes it's a complete circumferential, is that the right word? Where it goes around the entire diameter of the pipe, and it just cracks. It splits, basically. So that can be a sleeve that we can cut out a section, put a coupling in, and put another section of pipe in. That's a pretty quick, very much of a spot repair. If the bell blows out, sometimes it cracks at the bell. It's a bell and spigot type connection. We have to take out a section of pipe. But usually we don't take out more than maybe 8 or 10 feet. So they're all relatively small spot repairs. And if we get a couple on the same line, then we target it for replacement.
Like North Grand, when we had two
Correct.
problems there, we said, okay, that cast iron's got to go, and we put different
Right.
pipe in. So,
Yeah, that was 1950s maybe, cast iron pipe. So, and that was a higher pressure class. That was over 100 psi.
So I guess where I would be going with that question is, at what point then do we actually do all of the replacements so we end up getting rid of the cast iron or the areas where we do have, repeated problems?
Right.
Do we get rid of stuff through attrition, or it just has to be, the break has to be so bad that that's what we do?
Well, we budget money every year to do water main replacement. So the way I've envisioned it going forward is that we would prioritize older lines that have a higher potential for breaking, and that we would just systematically start replacing, 1,000 feet a year, a couple thousand feet, and we'll tailor our capital improvement program to that over time. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
And again, we wish you the best with your PhD dissertation defense and all that.
Thank you.
Megan, it says that's coming up this semester coming up.
In the fall, yeah, hopefully.
Graduating in December, probably.
Ideally, yeah.
Okay. Well, best wishes.
I'll count my chickens before they hatch.
No.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, we now move to item number D on the agenda tonight. That's consent agenda. These items are considered routine in nature. The council has had a chance to look these over ahead of time. Do I hear a motion to read by title only?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, Laura?
Thank you, Mayor. Your consent agenda consists of a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the regular meeting of May 14, 2019, and approve them as submitted. A motion approving disbursements represented by accounts payable checks numbered 523 through 527, totaling $594,700.41, and accounts payable checks numbered 95493 through 95514, totaling $395,166.36. A motion approving disbursements represented by accounts payable checks numbered 95835 through 95914, totaling $715,377.15. A motion approving disbursements represented by accounts payable checks numbered 95915 through 96015, totaling $1,334,194.08, and void of accounts payable check number 95988. A motion approving disbursements represented by accounts payable checks numbered 96016 through 96062 totaling $176,247.22. A motion to approve a lodging tax grant to Palouse Summer Series in an amount up to $20,000 for the Palouse Summer Series baseball tournament. In addition, you have two resolutions. Resolution number R-34-19, a resolution pre-authorizing the acceptance of U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, Airport Improvement Program grant monies funding airport equipment and fencing. And resolution number R-35-19, a resolution authorizing the execution of leases for each city-owned Guy Street property on the terms set forth for each property.
Is there any item the council would like out for discussion?
Number 7, just for comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any others? Then the consent agenda consists of items 2 through 6 and 8 and 9. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moving second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed with that? Brandon,
Yeah.
number 7.
So I just wanted to make a comment on this, and I've talked to Pat about this. She's the committee chair. I really appreciate that this went back under consideration. I know previously they had about half the amount awarded, and when we get our economic development person, I'm sure they could give a really good economic impact statement, but this is a series that does tremendous amount of business for our hotels and our restaurants and everything like that. So I was really pleased to see this came back at the amount that they had initially requested. I think this is a phenomenal thing for bringing people in, so I want to give them kudos for re-examining this.
And it has shown that, I've heard that report many times of how well the summer series is probably one of our better summer things that's going on.
No doubt.
So, then
So thank
with
you.
that, do you want to make a motion on it?
Yeah, I'll move to
Approve number 7.
Approve number 7 of the
Lodging
consent
tax grant, okay.
Second.
Moving second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That we now go to the regular agenda. First of all is a public hearing on the draft critical area ordinance. We go with that. Pete Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor. The Washington State Growth Management Act requires all local jurisdictions to maintain what's called the Critical Areas Ordinance to protect certain resources like wetlands, habitat areas, and preserve resource lands like farms and forests. The Act also requires that these ordinances be updated periodically. Pullman's last set of revisions was adopted in 2007, and the next update is required by June 30 of this year. Staff and the Planning Commission have prepared draft amendments for your consideration tonight. As required, the amendments apply best available science to the protection of these critical areas, and they also increase consistency with the city's 2016 Shoreline Master Program, which provides protections for critical areas along the shoreline of the South Fork of the Palouse River. The draft amendments before you include changes to definitions, to wetland classifications, open space buffers, and impact mitigation requirements, and to habitat conservation area designations and regulations, including those affecting riparian habitat areas. In my opinion, the most significant change among them all is the wetland buffer requirements. They would increase by 50 feet for most projects. So in the case of a land use development near a wetland, that development would have to be set back further from that wetland, or if it receives some form of exemption, then greater compensation would be required. That often takes the form of additional native vegetation plantings in that buffer area. The city is required to notify state agencies of its intent to adopt these ordinance amendments. We sent that notice to the state on April 3rd. In response, the Department of Ecology sent an email, which you have in your packet. They had some minor suggested modifications. That was received just before the Planning Commission public hearing regarding this matter that was held on April 24. No public comments were offered at that hearing. So in the end, the Commission asked that Ecology's amendments be incorporated into the draft amendments, and it recommended approval of that amended ordinance to the Council. Subsequent to that hearing, we received an email from the Department of Commerce. They actually administer the Critical Areas Ordinance Program. They also had additional minor suggested modifications, and those modifications have been made for the draft that's before you tonight. I will note that state agency endorsement is very important in this whole process. These agencies will support the city in the event of an appeal, so long as the ordinance is constructed in accordance with their direction. So that's something to keep in mind. Tonight's session is a public hearing, and in response to the hearing notice, we have received 3 sets of written comments that I'm aware of. One is from the school district. It said it had no comments or questions about the proposed ordinance. The other 2 were from the Palouse Prairie Foundation. I know there's a representative from that foundation in the audience tonight. One of those pieces was a letter received today. The other was a document with numerous recommended changes to the draft. I've looked over all of their suggestions. Many of them are editorial comments that, in my opinion, should not be implemented. For instance, they request revisions to terms and definitions that are mandated by the state, so those can't be changed. And they ask for changes to provisions that have been endorsed specifically by state agencies. On the other hand, their comments that bring attention to the Palouse Prairie ecosystem are, I think, well-founded. I want to mention that we do protect the Palouse Prairie ecosystem as part of our administration of the Critical Areas Ordinance currently, and would continue to do so. But they're recommending that there be multiple provisions in the ordinance to address the Palouse Prairie ecosystem. To me, that seems excessive and out of balance in comparison with the other habitats that we also protect, but I would support mention of the Palouse Prairie ecosystem as an example under the subsection on habitats and of local importance. That's on page 67 of your draft regulations. And there it talks about habitats and species of local importance. It describes them and then says, such as high-quality native plant communities and those with historical or cultural importance. I certainly could support including a reference to the Palouse Prairie ecosystem under that text.
But would the state approve of it if we put that in?
I would check with the state before
Putting it in there.
before we took it back to the council in the form of an ordinance, so definitely, yes. The foundation also provided 2 other comments that are noteworthy. They actually identified errors in the text, and I try to keep this error-free, but in this case they did identify some errors. They're both found on page 19 of the draft ordinance. Under the definition of porous soil types, there's reference to the National Resources Conservation Service. That's actually the Natural Resources Conservation Service, so that's an error that should be corrected. And the other is the definition of practical alternative. The foundation pointed out that that term doesn't appear anywhere in the ordinance, and that's right. It probably was in a earlier rendition of the ordinance, but no longer appears. The term feasible alternative does appear several times in the ordinance, and so staff would suggest that we change that term from practical alternative to feasible alternative for purposes of the definitions there. Finally, the action requested of you is to take public input, since this is a public hearing tonight, and then provide direction to staff on next steps. If you do decide to proceed with the proposal, then staff will prepare an ordinance for review and action at your meeting of June 18, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Questions first before we take public comment. Yes, Nathan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Pete, this is really extensive. This is great. I wanted to ask, now with the extra 50-foot buffer zone, if there's a building that's already within that buffer zone, and I'm assuming it's grandfathered in, but if they decide to do something with the facade or improve it, how does that affect it? And then I have another question, so I'll stop there.
You're correct that it would be grandfathered if it's existing now, right now. If they were to add on to that, then these rules, if these rules go into effect as proposed, would come into play. And so they would either need to set back that addition farther, 50 foot farther, or again, if they were granted some form of an exemption. And, quite frankly, there are certain exemptions that are allowed in Pullman, given the topography. Oftentimes, developers are squeezed between our steep topography and wetlands, and so we do allow for exemptions when it meets the criteria in the code. And so, yeah, if they were granted an exemption, then most likely they would need to provide some other form of compensation, which, like I mentioned, usually is in the form of native vegetation, additional plantings in that buffer area to provide greater wildlife habitat.
Okay, second question. So and this is a question I think we've discussed quite a bit in council about how do we bring more notice, highlight our wetlands, our waterways more. Now I know providing different buffer zones, vegetation, so on and so forth. Is there a way for us to find a balance between highlighting those waterways and then also allowing some way for it to be highlighted, for the public to be able to access these ways? Because there's a lot of places where it's just not possible, and I'm not sure with the critical areas how that would, work.
Yeah, it depends on how we're highlighting the areas. Certainly, trail systems, many of the trail systems in town are exempt from, or they're considered to be allowed activities within critical areas, riparian areas, because we want to draw people down to the water and gain an appreciation for it. And so that's built into the ordinance itself. And so definitely we would, there's been no changes proposed in that regard to the ordinance. And so that form of highlighting our critical areas and providing greater awareness is certainly built into the code.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Dan, and then we'll go down.
First, I have three things. First is, I think, just a typo, or it's a term I'm not familiar with. On number 5 on page 6, I think it's supposed to say micro-ohms, and I'm guessing that's just a misspelling there.
That was on page 5?
Page 6, number 5.
Ah. I will check on that,
Okay.
just to make sure.
Page 19, number 109. That is the definition of project area. So the addition of that, the additional clause there, I'm just kind of curious, what is the effect of that? So when the action binds the land, such as a subdivision, short subdivision, binding site plan, planned unit development, or rezone, the project area shall include the entire parcel at a minimum. So what does that look like in practical terms of, I'm a property owner and I want to make a change to something. What does that mean?
What it means is that we take the entire land parcel into consideration with respect to administration of the critical areas ordinance. But binding in terms of any kind of a legal sense of it being binding, no. It just means that we consider that all as in our review of a critical area report and how we would assess impact on the critical areas in that property.
So what I'm thinking of is, like, if we have a new subdivision going in and that's the unit we're talking about of the parcel land, and there's a wetland area within or approaching that.
Yeah, so
in enforcing this, we're going to bind the entire subdivision to that.
what we would do in many of those cases is, for the entire subdivision, say a preliminary plat is proposed for an area, and a portion of it would affect a wetland. Then it would be a condition on the preliminary plat, not just a portion of that or one of the lots. So it would be a condition of approval, say, for the entire preliminary plat.
Okay. And then my last question is on page 24, number 144. And I'm assuming that the additional clause there is contingent upon the first clause. So where the first part of that definition says that which equals or exceeds 50% of the market value, the second part of that, where it says substantial improvement, is considered to occur when the first alteration of any wall, ceiling, floor. So we're still talking, you still have to meet that 50% requirement, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Al?
I want to go back a little bit, talk a little bit more about what Nathan was saying with the additional 50-foot setback. So we had no contractors respond or anything about that? Any words from them?
Not thus far, no.
Okay.
And as I mentioned in the staff report, we did send out 70 to 80 letters to various groups and individuals in the community, including the real estate development community. So for both the Planning Commission and City Council public hearings.
Okay, and this additional 50 foot is a state suggestion?
Yes.
So this is something that we would need to do?
Yeah,
Is the word even suggestion can be used? It's pretty mandated, isn't it?
right. I mean, there's not much wiggle room with these.
No.
Again, as I mentioned, if we don't follow their direction, then they would not be in a position to support us in the event of an appeal, for instance.
Okay.
So it's I don't know, mandate may be too strong, but it's definitely a very, very strong suggestion.
Okay.
It's pretty close.
As always, though, I mentioned before
That's
about
a really big number. It may not sound like a lot to people, but 50 feet additional, what is it now? What is the setback now?
it depends on the category of wetland, but it's anywhere from 50 feet to 200 feet, something like that.
Okay. So it just kind of depends. So this 50 feet will be added to every one of those?
Yeah, I'm simplifying things, but
Yeah,
for most of the wetland categories, like category 2 or 3, which are the middle range wetlands, we find a lot of in Pullman, yes, the 50-foot increased buffer would apply. And as I mentioned with exemptions, we do our best to strike a balance and work with developers to make development happen in this community within the confines of the code.
Okay. And then I just have one other question. Is there anything else in here that you see that stands out to you? I mean, you've mentioned that already, but is there anything particular that you see that we would maybe want to change or not change or anything like that? This is a very big document, so.
It is. The riparian habitat areas have expanded. That's the area along river environments. They were 75 feet. That was a recommendation in our existing code. Now they're upwards of 200 feet in terms of where we have to pay attention to those river environments for developments that occur within those areas. We don't have a lot of development within those areas just because people stay out of the floodplain and everything, so that's one thing. And then the other, the new regulations introduce the concept of that riparian habitat area ending either at the 200-foot mark or a street or a railroad line, whichever comes first. And so a lot of those are going to be confined because
Okay.
we've got roads and railroad lines close to our rivers in town. So probably not that much of a difference. I mention it because it seems like it's such a big difference, 75 to 200, but I think in practice it won't have much of an impact.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Does the state
Yeah.
make a distinction between the quality of the river and the size of the river? I mean, if you're talking the Snake River and the Clearwater, it's a river, and then you're talking the South Fork of the Palouse. During the summer, it's down to pretty well getting to a creek.
It was navigable, remember?
Yeah, well, North Grand was for a couple of hours. But that's Missouri Flat Creek, yeah, okay.
Yes.
But do they make a distinction?
They do make a distinction. There's this water typing system that's described in the code that does break down the different streams in town. And there are fish-bearing perennial streams, there are fish-bearing seasonal, there are non-fish-bearing seasonal. So, yeah, they break those all down, and the riparian habitat area width is different depending on all those. But for the streams, most of the streams in town, South Fork, Missouri Flat Creek, Dry Fork Creek, it's all 200 or a road or railroad line, whichever.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay. If not, then this time we're going to open a public hearing for your comments. Again, public hearing before us is a 3-minute length, and I will have signs here to hold up to give you a 1-minute warning, 30 seconds, and then a time's up warning. So if anybody's here who would like to make a comment regarding the critical areas, please do so now and make sure you have signed in. You can sign in later, okay? And identify yourself for the record, please.
I'm David Hall, representing the Palouse Prairie Foundation. My home address is 1334 Wallen Road in Moscow. I'm going to read a brief bit here talking about the Palouse Prairie and its importance and why we're concerned about it. The mission of the Palouse Prairie Foundation is to preserve and restore the remaining native Palouse Prairie remnants in Whitman and Latah counties. Palouse Prairie is an ecosystem that historically covered most of Whitman County and the non-forested areas of Latah County. Less than 1% of the original prairie remains due to conversion to agricultural production primarily. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has recognized the Palouse Prairie a component of shrub steppe within their priority habitat and species list. The Washington Natural Heritage Program ranks the Palouse Prairie as S1, meaning that it is critically impaired. Both Whitman and Latah counties have performed surveys of Palouse Prairie remnants. These efforts were supported by funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In Whitman County, the survey was administered by the Palouse Conservation District. A map showing the inventoried and potential prairie sites within Whitman County was created and provided to the Whitman County Planning Department, Alan Thompson, and so forth. And they use it as a reference to guide development. Although Latah County does not have a critical areas ordinance, their planning department has a similar map and uses it in an advisory and educational manner. And I just provided Mr. Dickinson here with the link to the Whitman County Palouse Prairie map, and it does show potential remnants within the city of Pullman, a few areas. The Palouse Prairie is an ecosystem that has been recognized by federal and Washington state agencies as being unique and valuable. Money is being spent to preserve, protect, and enhance remaining remnants. Whitman County has included a process to preserve it through their critical areas ordinance. We request that the city of Pullman joins the effort to preserve Palouse Prairie, and I know they are doing it, but it's not specifically mentioned in the ordinance draft language, for the benefit and education of its citizens by incorporating reference to it in the update to their critical areas ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to make a comment?
Hi, Allison Harris, 330 Southeast Camino Street in Pullman. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Mostly I had some questions, and so I'll just state them and see what you guys can do with that. I noticed that in the summary in Appendix B, it says that when the ordinance is violated, that the city may enforce penalties. I was wondering if there are specific penalties included in the actual ordinance that's written, and if so, what are they? And if not, can the amendments include specific penalties that would deter people from not following the ordinance? And to go hand in hand with that, does the city check for violations of this ordinance, or is it like other code violations where a resident has to file a complaint before enforcement can occur? Should the ordinance include responsibility from the city to check for violations of the developments? It was noted that contractors had not made any complaints, and I have to wonder if that might be because they know they don't get checked, or maybe they just get a little slap on the wrist if they don't comply. Those are just thoughts I have. I also read in the summary that the city is supposed to follow up for 5 years to make sure that mitigation efforts are successful. Is there something in the ordinance currently written that says how often the city checks on this? And if the city doesn't check often enough on mitigation efforts, could they be liable for damage caused in areas that they're supposed to be protecting with this ordinance? And the last thing is, that goes along those lines, is I have a friend, and this might not apply to this specific situation, but above their property, which is above the South Fork of the Palouse River, there is a black, one of those retaining fabrics that goes along the fence. And there were times when water was flowing over that and just pouring down the hill down into the river. And that might be a situation where the mitigation effort wasn't working correctly, and if so, and she reported that, then what would the response be? And I just wondered if any of that stuff is written into the ordinance currently, and if not, should we consider putting some of this stuff in the amendments? That's all, thank you.
Okay. You want to address that, Pete?
Could we continue taking
Yes,
some public
continue
input,
taking
and I'll
input. No
do my
problem.
research here,
Okay, no problem.
please.
Anyone else who would like to make any comments?
My name is Jana Schulteis. I'm with Schweitzer Engineering at 2350 Northeast Hopkins Court. In reference to the ordinance and the comments made by staff and council, I appreciate the thoroughness of the review, the questions that were asked. They're very important to developers such as myself of our own businesses within the Pullman region. And so to answer some of the questions that Pete will be helping with answering, I do know from the critical areas that we've developed, there is a rigorous understanding between the city as well as the developer to perform within a specified period of time, and it's appreciated that they're willing to work with and make sure that the project is completed. So I do want to appreciate both the questions as well as the work that the city has done on our behalf. I do also ask, though, that in this document, we consider limiting the overreach because we are private property owners, and we do need to consider the value that we place on the ground when we buy it, and we maybe perhaps don't understand that this was a portion of a wetland or a critical area. And so I think that dialogue needs to be considered, as well as the appreciation of the variance and the exemption process. So I appreciate being able to comment, and thank you very much.
Anyone else?
My name is Lonnie Cordova. I live at 2351 Brayton Road, just outside of the city limits. I live in the county. Was that all the information you needed? Okay.
We hope all of you who testify will sign into the book, just to make sure that Dee has all the...
Okay.
Thank you.
I really have a lot more questions than comments. I didn't have time to read through the entire 78 pages or however many document. I did start, and then I just noticed, I guess my first question is, I'm reading the summary in, I think it was is it Appendix B? Where it talks about the changes that are being made, and they aren't numbered, so I can't give you a number, but it's at the top of page 5, addition of wetland impact mitigation ratios for rehabilitation and enhancement of wetlands, and inclusion of a requirement specifying a 1-to-1 ratio for mitigation of impacts to wetland buffer areas. I thought that had been a 1-to-3, where you had to replace the wetlands with 3 times as much. Am I wrong? Am I wrong in wondering if that's a change? I guess that's a question I have. And if it has changed, I'm wondering why we decreased it, why they have to replace less wetlands than they used to before. Another question I had is there anything included in this plan that talks about the slope requirements for new builds? There's a map showing the risk areas for landslides and for erosion. And I know I'm actually the person that she was talking about, the friend that a place was built and water overflowed onto my property, and it washed away a lot of my topsoil from the building of the Kamiak Elementary. Well, I don't know if people go out and check the sites where builds are going to be made to see and to measure the slope, because our property already was in the landslide risk area, and now the Kamiak Elementary was built on a slope that's probably 4 times the percent slope that was existing there, and it already was a landslide risk area. So I'm just wondering how this is going to protect from future builds increasing the risk of landslide. Also, I just think all these extensions of the borders of the critical areas of the river, they're helpful, but I think the biggest thing that's causing the pollution of our river is the water we're dumping into it from stormwater and the sewer water. I haven't checked it in the last couple of years, but the stormwater being dumped into the river probably pollutes it 100 times more at least than just whatever might be built next to it. So I'm also just would love for you to include something in here that requires a basin study of areas that are being developed before they can develop them, so that the people who are living downhill and downriver do not get a bunch of water dumped on them because of the new developments.
You're through
So,
this up.
thank you.
Anyone else who would like to testify to that? Going once? Then we will close the public hearing. And that concludes the public hearing, and Pete, I think you'll be getting back later on some of these comments and questions that came up.
No, I think I've got a handle on most of the answers here.
Okay.
The first question that Allison asked was about penalties, and the penalties are set forth in the ordinance. Bear with me here. So the ordinance says, when a critical area or its buffer has been altered in violation of this chapter, the city shall have the authority first to issue a stop work order, to cease all ongoing development work, and then order the rehabilitation of the critical area or the buffer. It does say there are minimum standards for that restoration, and then penalties. The city has the ability to assess a civil infraction shall be subject to a fine in an amount not to exceed $500 for each violation. So those are the penalties that are in the existing ordinance, and they're not proposed to be changed, and that is on page 38 and 39, I'm sorry, of the, if you're following along, page 38 and 39 of the ordinance text. Does the city check for violations, or is it done on a complaint basis? As with all ordinances and codes with the city, we act in a proactive manner, so if there is a violation that we see, then we act on it. We don't wait for a complaint. We only will act on a complaint basis when it's very difficult to know that the activity is going on otherwise. A good example in the zoning code is when we have 5 unrelated individuals who are living in a house in an R1 zone. Oftentimes we won't know that until we get a neighbor complain about that and say, nope, sorry, you can only have 3 unrelated. So we do act on all of our regulations in a proactive manner. And that's the same with the critical areas ordinance. As far as monitoring, how often do we check? By code, the monitoring period is 5 years long. And we ask for a monitoring report from a qualified professional, usually a biologist, in years 1, 3, and 5 after the mitigation plan for compensation has been approved by the city. And so we follow up on those 3 years, 1, 3, and 5. And I think that was about it. Yeah, following up on any complaints that we get, yes, we always act on those, and we respond to all complaints. Appreciate Ms. Schultheis's comments too, and definitely we want to work with developers, as I mentioned before, again, within the confines of the code. Ms. Cordova, mitigation ratios, those have not changed. For reestablishment of a wetland for most of the categories that are in Pullman, like Category 2, 3, and 4 wetlands. If you destroy a wetland, then it's a 3-to-1 ratio. So if it's a 100-square-foot wetland that you destroyed, you'll have to recreate a 300-square-foot wetland in another location. And the same is true for Categories 3s and 4s in terms of the basic concept. The ratios are lower, but those have not changed. They're 2-to-1 for a Category 3 and 1.5-to-1 for a Category 4. And that 1-to-1 ratio that you mentioned had to do with effects on buffer buffers only. With respect to slopes, of course, they're required to be addressed in accordance with the code, and that is true with the development of the Kamiak School as well as everything else. And the basin study, it's outside the scope of this particular project, but it's something certainly the city could consider as we move forward.
Okay. Thank you for getting through all that and answering them. All right. We now move on to our next item tonight. It's a resolution authorizing the execution of an engineering services agreement between the City of Pullman, Ingenuity Systems, and our city engineer, Kara Haley, is here.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council members. The action before you is an engineering services agreement with Ingenuity Systems, LLC, for the Pullman Aquatic Center HVAC upgrade project. This project is included in the city's capital improvement program, and it aims to replace the existing mechanical system at the Pullman Aquatic Center, which is almost 20 years old and nearing typical life expectancy. Two separate HVAC units presently serve the facility. The first services the natatorium, and the second serves the remaining facility support spaces, which include the fitness room, the locker rooms, and the lobby and office area. The overall goal of this project is to replace these two HVAC units while also considering improvements and modifications that may solve or significantly improve a number of ongoing maintenance and operational concerns. For starters, a single thermostat controls the HVAC unit that serves the fitness room, locker rooms, and the lobby and office area. This thermostat is located in the lobby and currently providing poor temperature control to the remaining areas, which should ideally function at varying climates. As an example, the fitness room generally requires cooling, while the locker rooms typically warrant heat or to be a slightly warmer temperature. Maintenance staff has attempted to address this challenge over the years with the addition of standalone units in these spaces, which unfortunately contributes to system inefficiencies and does still fail to provide a complete solution to that particular problem. Poor air quality and insufficient dehumidification are additional facility concerns that we battle at the facility. Design humidity is typically set between 40 and 60% in the natatorium itself, although actual operation tends to end up in the upper range of this, sometimes into the mid to upper 60s. As a result, it's not uncommon for condensation to form on the interior walls of the pool area. These conditions, along with poor airflow and ventilation in certain locations, commonly lead to rapid degradation of facility equipment, in turn requiring high maintenance costs, recurrent attention, and frequent replacement. One example of that would be the equipment in the fitness room. Some of those treadmills and features need to be replaced at a relatively high rate. To select a consultant for this design work, staff solicited proposals from qualified firms. 6 proposals were received, which were reviewed and ranked by a selection committee comprised of both city and Pullman School District personnel. The firm selected through this process is Ingenuity Systems, LLC, who's highly regarded for their expertise dealing specifically with mechanical systems and natatorium environments, which do tend to be more complicated environments than typical buildings. An engineering services agreement has been negotiated with Ingenuity Systems, LLC, for design of this project, to be performed on a cost reimbursable basis with a not-to-exceed amount of $127,590. Project costs will be shared equally with the Pullman School District, pending concurrent school board approval, resulting in a cost commitment from the city of $63,795. Design services would be completed this year, allowing for construction of the project in the summer of 2020. Staff is recommending that council adopt the provided resolution authorizing an engineering services agreement with Ingenuity Systems, LLC for this project. And I'd be happy to take any questions you guys might have.
Questions of Karen? Once the engineering study is done, we will get then a pretty firm estimate of what it will cost to do this entire project, because I know it's very corrosive in that kind of environment when you're in
Yeah, that's a really good question. In this particular case with this engineering services agreement, there are some factors that we don't know a lot about right now, and we won't know that until we dive into the the scoping preliminary phase of that, and we get their electrical engineer, their structural engineer, some of those people on site to really dive into the data and see what it's really going to take to do this project. We've done our best with the information that we have right now to kind of estimate where that comes in, but there are some uncertainties. One of the ways that this engineering services agreement is set up is that we'll kind of reevaluate that after the scoping phase to make sure that it still aligns with what we expect to see. So that's a great question on this particular case. It is a complicated environment, and so there are some uncertainties, and that's one of the reasons we did seek for proposals from lots of different companies who have experience in this particular environment and have kind of some innovative insights to solve some of the problems that we're having.
Excellent. Any other questions? Then do I hear a motion on this resolution?
Move to adopt Resolution R-36-19.
Second.
Laura?
Resolution number R-36-19, a resolution authorizing the execution of an engineering services agreement between the City of Pullman and Ingenuity Systems LLC for the purpose of designing the Pullman Aquatic Center HVAC upgrade project.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, item number 3 is a resolution accepting a bid of Motley & Motley for Jefferson Elementary water line replacement. Timely with our introduction we had today about water lines. Once again, Kara.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and City Council members. Like you said, and thank you to Megan as well for her earlier presentation discussing historical water main breaks in Pullman. It actually couldn't be more fitting in regards to the matter at hand, which stems from a water main break that occurred in early April of this year. As it turns out, this particular water main break holds consistent with some of the historical patterns that Megan discussed, occurring on an aging 6-inch cast iron water line located at Jefferson Elementary School. It is situated in the immediate vicinity of the 2 northern hotspots that she identified it on her map. It is in the intermediate pressure zone, but it's right at the interface with the low pressure zone. So some of her figures were not far off from what we saw in this particular circumstance. At the time of this incident, city maintenance and operations staff were able to quickly isolate the water main break, but they were unable to make a permanent repair due to excessive depth of fill present over the water main at this location. Rather than digging to nearly 16 feet to make a spot repair, it was necessary to cap the water line in 2 locations where the water line was shallower. This retained domestic water service to the school, but it did disconnect service to one of the 3 on-site fire hydrants. In addition, this cap segment currently prevents looping of the water distribution system in this vicinity, which is important for redundancy, fire flow, water pressure, and for water quality purposes. The permanent solution is installation of a new water line, which would reconnect the disabled fire hydrant, restore looping of the water distribution system, and also improve accessibility to the water line due to a shallower installation and a modified horizontal alignment. Engineering staff quickly turned around and prepared a design and utilized the Small Works roster to seek a qualified contractor. At the May 29th closing, 2 proposals were received. The low bidder was Motley Inc. at $94,563.78, which is slightly below the engineer's estimate of $99,341.47. Construction is scheduled to occur between June 17th and August 16th when the schools are on summer break. And we are recommending award of this project to Motley Inc., and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions of Kara on this? Okay. Then do I hear a motion on this resolution?
Move to adopt resolution number R-37-19.
Second.
Second.
Resolution number R-37-19, a resolution accepting the bid of Motley Inc. for Jefferson Elementary water line replacement and authorizing execution and delivery of the contract for said project.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item number 4 tonight is a resolution accepting a bid of Aero Concrete and Asphalt Specialties for the tennis court, and we might say pickleball, because we certainly heard the testimony about that. Kevin Gardis.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. The city has existing tennis courts in Sunnyside and Krugel Parks. Both existing facilities consist of 2 side-by-side tennis courts. The courts at both locations are in need of refurbishment and recoating. As part of this project, 1 court at each facility will be converted into pickleball courts, and I've included a plan sheet in your packet that shows the details. 2 pickleball courts will be created at Krugel and 4 pickleball courts at Sunnyside. Bids were opened on May 22nd, with one bid received from Aero Concrete Asphalt Specialties, Inc. at $84,605.75. The architect's estimate is $86,240. Funding will be from the Metropolitan Park District, and contract time is 60 days from notice to proceed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Yes.
I have no questions, but I do have a comment. This was budgeted at $110,000, so we got a steal on this one. I'm glad to see that we're way under budget on this. And I'm 1,000% sure because Mrs. Harris's husband came about pickleball courts, so make sure you let him know we're going forward.
I play now too.
Okay. If you build it, they will come, yeah.
We had the former tennis coach for WSU testifying on that as well, so.
And it's part of Lentil Festival now.
Yeah, that's right. So if there are no further comments or questions, do I hear a motion on this one?
Yeah, move to adopt.
Second.
Move in second. Lord?
Resolution number R-38-19, a resolution accepting the bid of Aero Concrete and Asphalt Specialties, Inc. for tennis court refurbishment and authorizing execution and delivery of the contract for said project.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item number 5 is a resolution authorizing the execution of a professional services agreement between the City of Pullman and BDS Planning and Urban Design about the Central Business District. Kevin?
Thank you, Mayor. In 2018, Council adopted a slate of strategic priorities and goals. Under the heading of Community Identity and the subheading Downtown is a goal of creating a master plan for downtown Pullman. A number of elements will be considered in the plan, and many of those are mentioned in the staff report. Funding for the master plan was included in the 2019 budget, and staff sent out a request for proposals in December of last year. Through multiple stages of the RFP review process, a consultant team led by BDS Planning and Urban Design was selected. The consultant team is well qualified and has extensive experience with urban master planning. The project manager, Brian Scott, spent 17 years leading the Oregon Main Street program as president and executive director of the Oregon Downtown Development Association and chair of its research committee. Consultant team members are currently working on a downtown master plan for Lewiston, Idaho, and recently completed a downtown master plan for Colville, Washington. A professional services agreement has been negotiated with BDS. A detailed scope and budget breakdown are included in your council packets. The work will be performed on a cost reimbursable basis with an estimated budget of $122,800. As requested by the consultant team, a steering committee has been put together to provide input during the planning process. The committee is made up of members of the original selection committee and additional representation, including Central Business District business owners. Kickoff meeting is scheduled for June 18th, which will include a discussion at the city council meeting that evening with council to kick the project off, assuming you approve the consultant agreement. We expect the plan will take approximately 8 months to prepare, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Questions or comments on this one?
So,
Yes, Nathan?
real quick. So I noticed in the master plan look scope, doesn't include analysis of GIS-related land use or building inventory data. Seems that that would be an important component, but that's not part of the plan for BDS?
I would say that's kind of typically a planning, I mean, I guess it is a master plan, so we don't have GIS yet information, so.
I'm more about the building inventory than the GIS. I understand that, I've been pushing GIS for decades, so, but yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with the master plan is there are a lot of elements that we want to look at as part of that, and I enumerated a lot of them in the staff report, and we also have a finite budget to work with too. I think there's obviously the potential to do a lot of follow-on work with this, depending on what we can get to with the master plan. So more of a building inventory could be a follow-on. It's just not part of this master plan.
Okay, like it, okay.
Al?
Just a quick comment. I was on the I was on the selection committee and am on the steering committee now. And, these guys appear to be really good. We selected them because of their work in Washington and kind of locally with Colville. We knew that one had been done. I don't know if we knew they were doing Lewiston or not when we interviewed them.
When I met with them, the individual, they were talking about Lewiston.
Yeah, so there was a lot of reasons to select this group over some of the others, and the committee had pretty good consensus on these guys. So we're hoping that they can perform for us, but I think we rated them pretty high.
That's what we heard from the Downtown Association as well. They were thought very well. Okay, with that, do I hear a motion on this?
Move to adopt R-39-19.
Second.
Second, Laura?
Resolution number R-39-19, a resolution authorizing the execution of a professional services agreement between the City of Pullman and BDS Planning and Urban Design for preparation of a central business district master plan.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item number 6 tonight is a resolution authorizing the purchase of portable radios and related equipment, especially for our emergency responders. Gary Jenkins, our police chief, is here with us.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Our current portable radios are over 10 years old, and they've been degrading in the quality of their transmission and reception for the past few years. In 2016, the Whitman County Department of Emergency Management commissioned a study of the radio system throughout Whitman County, which we're a part of. And there were a number of recommendations made, and of those recommendations, the county radio technician identified 2 of the recommendations that would provide the greatest improvement for radio quality for Pullman staff. And those 2 recommendations were replacing our portable radios and the addition of a new radio tower in South Pullman. Both of those items were presented to CIP committee last year and were subsequently recommended to council and ultimately approved by council last year under CIP funding. This proposes the purchase of portable radios on a state contract, which is authorized by Pullman City Code. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions of our police chief on this? Just wish it had happened a couple of years earlier, because I know they've been struggling with some of these things. So do I hear a motion on this resolution?
Move to adopt R-40-19.
Second. Second, Laura?
Resolution number R-40-19, a resolution authorizing the purchase of portable radios and related equipment and accessories through Washington State NASPO Value Point Public Safety Communications Equipment 06913 agreement.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? At this point, is there any new business to come before the council tonight? You had something? Pardon?
I do have something.
Okay.
I just got a couple of quick questions in regards to maybe some update for the council on some things. Kevin, the path up in Copper Basin that what's the status of that? We haven't had an update on this since January, so just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think you had asked me about it at a council meeting earlier this year, and Sam Nasrallah, our senior civil engineer, worked on a preliminary design for it. I reviewed that in the last month or so. It's very challenging from our typical design standpoint of preparing plans and specs. So Sam and I were talking here recently, and our plan is to, and I think I'd mentioned it before, to get with Motley and try to change order it into an existing project, our path project for this year. And we would essentially kind of pioneer the pathway in instead of trying to do our traditional design, put out plans, get bids, that sort of thing. That seemed to be the most expedient and it's going to be really complicated to do it the other way. So that's our plan at this point.
Do we have sufficient funding for it from our?
Yeah, the estimate is probably, it depends a little bit on the final numbers we get from Motley, but we're probably talking about $80,000, give or take, to do that work. And I think we've got something like 60-something from the security, so it's close. But right now, it looks like it'll be a little bit over.
Projected timeline?
This summer. or towards the end of summer, late.
Hopefully have it done
Yeah.
by the end of
Yeah.
summer.
We
I
kind of.
mean, I understand it's challenging.
It's very challenging, extremely. And we need the ground to dry out, so it'll probably be maybe a September project. So that's what we're thinking.
Okay. I have one other thing, and I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So in regards to the rezone for a business on Center Street and our denial of the rezone, can you give us an update on where we're at on that?
Well, as you know, that is an ongoing code enforcement matter, and so I'm going to defer to Laura for a response.
Perfect.
And I'm going to give you the same answer I gave earlier today, which is that the council should not be involved in the discussion of any ongoing code enforcement matter in order to protect the due process rights of the subject of that investigation and enforcement action.
That's good. I bring this up for the reason of our constituents and the residents of the city of Pullman, to make sure that they understand that we are still moving forward with things. We're not just letting things lay by the side. And that's what I'm trying to make sure is happening.
Okay. Any other new business to come before the council? If not, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Those second, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?